What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And joining me today, you missed him while he was away at the Combine Week, Jimmy Watkins, cleveland.com columnist. And here's back to talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers as they face off against the Detroit Pistons on Tuesday night. Jimmy, this game is the final of the regular season matchup between the Cavs and the Pistons. Two teams that have gone neck and neck for a majority of the season. Obviously, the Detroit Pistons being the number one seed in the East. They are 8.5 games ahead of the Cleveland Cavaliers, who are the fourth seed in the Eastern Conference. But the main difference between the matchup that they recently had and Tuesday's matchup, Isaiah Stewart is back for the Detroit Pistons, and the Cavs will still be without Donovan Mitchell. It'll mark his fourth consecutive game where Donovan Mitchell has not suited up in the wine and gold. But let's focus more on who's playing right now. Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley have come to form. Evan Mobley getting back from a second calf injury of the season and looking more and more like himself. Jarrett Allen, Black History Month, JA, we understand what he brought throughout the entire month of February. What are you thinking about when it comes to the physicality, the discipline that they've shown over the last couple of games, and how that could be changed or altered based on one singular player's return, and potentially looking at this as a potential playoff matchup with the Pistons being fully healthy coming into Tuesday night's game?
Well, I think Isaiah Stewart can change a lot of the aspects about this matchup, right? Because one of the biggest questions that we have about this front court annually is, can they handle the physicality? Isaiah Stewart might be the most physical player on the face of the earth right now. Why was he suspended? Because he got involved in defending one of his teammates before the All-Star break, right? So he stands on business. He's one of those dudes that he's not trying to pretend fight you. He will actually fight you, and he's going to make you feel his presence over the course of an entire game. By virtue of Isaiah Stewart being on the floor and more Isaiah Stewart, less Paul Reed, right? That's going to be part of the trade-off here. Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen will have to work harder. They will exert more energy. They will feel Isaiah Stewart. Isaiah Stewart's also statistically one of the best rim protectors in the NBA. Whoever they're trying to get to the rim, Isaiah Stewart, it's a different equation. With him out there, there's also like a heart and soul kind of piece of Isaiah Stewart with the Pistons. He brings their personality. He sets the tone. He's been around that team for a really long time. So I think they just feel more comfortable. They're more themselves when he's out there. I would say generally about this matchup, this would be the last one. Kind of a bummer that we never are really going to get a full preview, right? Because the first two games, I mean, what are we supposed to do with those post-Harden trade? And then we have these two games in quick succession. You know, Harden and Don don't play one of them, and Donovan will be playing this one. So I'd be interested to see who the Pistons might throw at James Harden. I'd be interested to see how Dean Wade, if he does play, I'd be interested to see how he looks guarding Cade Cunningham at this point in the season. But it's a weird spot here because this is a matchup that has some juice. This is a potential playoff preview, conference finals preview, depending on how the seeding shakes out. And I think this one, like, there might be some real energy to this one tomorrow night, just given the way the Cavs were talking at the end of the last one. And I understand why they were saying what they said, and they're down, like 4 or 5 rotation guys in that game. They still should have won that game. They didn't, of course, but then them talking like after one regular season game, like those guys aren't in our class. I think the Pistons might take that a little bit personally. And I just wish we had all the characters involved to see how that pans out. But I think from a battle of wills, a battle of basketball styles, which way does that rope go in the tug of war? I think we can learn something there. I think we can learn something about specific matchups. I'm excited still for this game.
Jimmy, I'm right there with you. And I think you mentioned the difference of the physicality, right? Simply with having Isaiah Stewart on the floor. I think you could also say that having James Harden out on the floor is going to throw a different look for the Detroit Pistons defense that they haven't seen of this iteration of the Cleveland Cavaliers, especially when we're talking about how they were able to pressure ball handlers in the backcourt when they simply wanted to ramp up their defensive pressure and get that ball out of the hands of guys like Dennis Schroeder, Keon Ellis, and the like when it came to their last matchup just a week ago. So I think when we're talking about how this game is going to be different and how this game could potentially look like what could be in the playoffs. Obviously, no Donovan Mitchell, that changes the trajectory of this dramatically. But James Harden being out on the floor also changes things for this Cleveland Cavaliers team. His patience, his pace of play, his operation in the half court. Obviously, he'll get his first true taste of the Pistons defense when he's out there trying to manipulate the spacing of the floor, changing the geometry with Sam Merrill and Jalen Tyson out there as well. What do you feel James Harden is going to be able to do best? Or what are we going to be seeing differently that is going to affect the game the most when it comes to him being out there on the floor? And obviously, also, Jimmy, the experimentation process that Kenny Atkinson has been doing, especially with utilizing a four guard lineup next to one big, whether that is Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, Thomas Bryant, even using James Harden as a point forward in these cases with him defending a larger person on the other end of the floor. I think it's going to be interesting to see that, especially with the physicality that we've continued to mention that Detroit plays with.
I would say that something that James Harden can do just by virtue of existing on the basketball court is dictate lineup decisions for the Pistons. Because if you're going to throw Duncan Robinson out there, as the Pistons like to do, because they have a lot of cramped spacing lineups out there, and they need him to unlock the driving lanes for Cade Cunningham and the room to breathe for some of their bigs right down there, right? Or guys like Asar Thompson, who likes to get in the paint and can't really shoot. Guys like that. Ron Holland, same thing. If you're going to have Duncan Robinson on the court, James Harden's going to say, come on up here, Duncan Robinson's man. You're setting a screen for me. And we're going to make Duncan Robinson defend an action, whether the Pistons will do everything they can to not switch that action. But now you're scrambling your defense. So that right there complicates things for JB Bickerstaff. I will be intrigued how the Pistons deploy their shooters versus their defenders. They don't have a lot of two-way guys. They have a lot of really good defensive players. They've got a couple of knockdown shooters, Kevin Huerter, Duncan Robinson. Kevin Huerter's barely played for them so far. They don't have a lot of guys who do both. So I think that's a challenging distinction. I'm also curious. I don't think that JB Bickerstaff would preview too much of his playoff hand in a situation like this, but I remain very curious about defenses that can be a little bit more switchable against James Harden and how often teams will ask, just because James Harden's still a remarkable player. He's still putting up numbers that resemble some of his peaks. He's not, but he's the high volume isolation efficiency is harder to replicate as you get to Harden's age. And I think the Pistons in some configurations have lineups that they could deploy that would make James Harden work a little harder, as opposed to, what I think they will do is they'll send two quite a bit around most James Harden pick and rolls and ask the rest of the non-Donovan Mitchell Cavs, because we know Don's not playing tomorrow, make a play behind the pick and roll defense, right? So inevitably, just over the course of the game, you're going to see Harden get some switches that he likes. I'll be interested to see what happens. In those moments where it's going to be a really small sample size, not necessarily predictive, but if James Harden gets Jalen Duren on a switch, or James Harden gets Isaiah Stewart on a switch, how do those guys hold up in those moments? Those could be small trinkets of information that the Pistons keep in their back pocket later on in a big time playoff setting if we get to that point. That's something else I'm watching.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about the blitzing portion of this conversation there, Jimmy, it's something that the Pistons are going to be able to do against this iteration of the Cavs, right? Without Donovan Mitchell on the floor, there's less options for the Cavs to go to. How is Sam Merrill going to hold up with having to handle the ball a little bit more? Kenny Atkinson, are you going to be okay with Jalen Tyson actually putting the ball on the floor and finding ways to distribute and facilitate if he's asked to do that with James Harden being on the floor at the same time? Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, can you create as release fouls from the elbow, from the free throw line extended, using your passing abilities to continue to put pressure on that defense when James Harden has two on him? So now you're basically playing 3-on-4, right? And I think there's a lot that can be learned from that, as you mentioned, Jimmy, but it's also kind of figuring out how to manage this when it comes to a minutes perspective for Kenny Atkinson as well, because you're without Donovan Mitchell, who's going to take up a lot of minutes when it comes to the playoffs, and also just understanding that these other guys who are going to be pivotal in tomorrow night's game are not going to be there more than likely. unless you decide to go to them. And I'm still skeptical that Kenny Atkinson is going to be willing to do that in the playoff series when he has a fully healthy roster. If he has a fully healthy roster, nobody knows what's going on with Max Strus at this point. So, Jimmy, I want to go a little bit further, though, right? We're talking about this game on Tuesday against the Pistons, and then the Cavs have a 4-day break. Do I expect them to practice? Maybe. It might be voluntary. They might have one on Thursday after a reset day on Wednesday. But if they don't, who knows? So I'm curious. How important do you think this is from a rest perspective for the Cleveland Cavaliers to get this little break in their schedule? Because we know there's only 20 games left for this Cleveland Cavaliers team, Jimmy. And obviously, as I mentioned, this is the fourth consecutive game that Donovan Mitchell is going to miss. Dean Wade is questionable. He's missed 2 consecutive games. Could be a third coming against the Detroit Pistons on Tuesday. Obviously, health is the biggest factor for the Cavs going into the playoffs because they know what health can mean for them in a 7-game playoff series.
You just even see it with little naggy injuries that have been popping up recently, like Donovan's groin, right? This break is huge for that. This break is given to give him an extended window to get that right before that last sprint of the season. That's huge for Harden's thumb. I mean, I think Harden's thumb, to a certain extent, is going to be what it's going to be by virtue of him not opting not to get surgery on it. I think there's just going to be some pain tolerance required with that, but it can't hurt to give him 3-4 days off in the middle of that, right? You could get a diminished version of the pain down the stretch. And I think just having this, if it's played 7 and 10, that's a load on the body and a load on the mind. So for these guys to get a reset at this point in the season, leading into the Boston game, of course, but leading into the home stretch of this season where they're going to be trying to finish strong, yeah, I think that matters. I don't know that they're willing to trade. I think they'd rather just not do the 7 and 10 because that's the trade-off, right? You get 4 days off because you played the 7 and 10. But given that you did, you're going to need that. These nagging injuries will pile up on you if you start stacking games again. So for that reason, mostly, I think it's really important for them.
And Jimmy, I mean, the schedule planners were just being cruel to this Cavs team because, of course, they get that 4 days off, and then they immediately are met with a Sunday, Monday back-to-back, and then a road trip as well. So we're going to focus more so on Sunday's matchup. Obviously, the ever-eluding question, is Jayson Tatum going to make his return at some point this week and then come back to play the Cleveland Cavaliers on Sunday at Rocket Arena? Jimmy, I want to give kudos to you because I don't know if anybody else throughout the ether of sports media was predicting that Jayson Tatum was going to make a return before the season even started. I was looking back at some of our old podcasts and you were on it from the very beginning. So let's talk about it. Obviously, the Cavs have that 4-day rest. Hopefully, everybody can return from injury outside of Max Strus. Again, who knows what's going on there. What would that mean as a potential setup for an Eastern Conference semifinals rematch against the Boston Celtics? A preview. What do you think the resounding idea from the NBA would be, especially the Eastern Conference, if Tatum were to make his return with 20 games left and facing against the Cavs, who he helped usher out of the playoffs just 2 years ago?
Yeah, the Cavs are miffed on 2 fronts here. Number one, I mean, Jayson Tatum's back. Didn't account for that. Didn't account for Jayson Tatum to come back and didn't account for the Boston Celtics to be one of the 5 or 6 best teams in the NBA without him this year. I'm upset about that. The other thing I'd be upset about is, well, if I'm playing him his first game back, I don't really know what that team looks like, right? Like, there's going to be a significant adjustment period for when Tatum comes back. By the way, him coming back with 20 games potentially would be huge to give them a legitimate runway to figure out what his capabilities are, what his role can be, given the new orientation, given both what he can do right now physically and given the season that Jaylen Brown has had. Like, the structure of that team has been altered for this portion of it. And Tatum has said publicly that he understands, like, I'm gonna defer to Jaylen Brown on this sort of thing. Like, I'm still working my way back. I think the idea would be, once the playoffs come around, Jayson Tatum can be like a souped up role player. He'd be a really good 3-and-D guy with maybe a little bit of playmaking wiggle, which of course is like a fraction of what he is at his best, but you don't want to push it too far. And given the timeline that he's pushing right now, like, this is I heard Bill Simmons talk about this today on his show. What parallels do we have for this in the league? Like, it's like Michael Jordan coming back from baseball is like the most recent one I can think of, right? That's kind of nuts. That's kind of this has been attempted so few times before that we don't really have much of a track record to compare it to. So I think it'll be a fascinating experiment. And for the Cavs, like I said, I'd much rather, if I was going to play Tatum and the Celtics during the stretch, I'd much rather play him like 10, 12 games in just so I can get a feel for what's going on with the new look Celtics as opposed to the first game back where they're just going to be figuring it out on the fly.
Obviously, the Celtics have been releasing like kind of preview tapes of Jayson Tatum behind the scenes, which I think is really interesting, the insight that we're getting. And it would be very weird for them to do that and then for him not to come back, right? So I'm just thinking like him talking to a doctor and the doctor saying that you're looking in good shape, your calf looks really good, and Jayson Tatum like straight up telling the doctor, I'm not coming back to be a role player. Okay, we get that, but also understanding who has done this before, who has come back within a year of injuring or tearing or rupturing their Achilles, and the amount of stress and the amount of strain that he's going to put on himself, on his body, and jokes, but Jaylen Brown saying the stress of playing for the Boston Celtics has been in part of how he's lost his hair because he has simply been wallowed up in that pressure. But we have to look at the standings, right, Jimmy? We have to look at what the reality could be for this Cavs team and their playoff run and potentially matching up with the Celtics. And obviously, as they're on this 4-day break, other teams are playing, including the two teams above them in the standings currently, as the Boston Celtics are beating up on the Milwaukee Bucks in Giannis Antetokounmpo's return without Jaylen Brown. The Detroit Pistons are the number 1 seed. The Boston Celtics are the number 2 seed, 5.5 games behind the Detroit Pistons and 3 games ahead of the Cleveland Cavaliers. The New York Knicks are 7 games behind the Detroit Pistons and 1.5 games ahead of the Cleveland Cavaliers. But in that 4-day stretch where the Cavs are off, the Knicks play the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Denver Nuggets, 2 heavyweights. The Boston Celtics, on the other hand, get the Charlotte Hornets and the Dallas Mavericks after beating the Milwaukee Bucks tonight. So we talked on this podcast in the past about the Cavs potentially eyeing that number 2 seed as a possibility. Jimmy, I'm here to say that possibility, that window has dwindled significantly over the last week, especially when the Cavs went on a 2-game losing streak that I don't think anybody was really expecting. So the question is now, at the number 4 seed in the Eastern Conference, they would currently be matched up with the Toronto Raptors in an opening round series, 7-game series, or Jimmy, the New York Knicks drop in the standings a little bit because of the teams that they have to face over the next 2 games, how close the Cavs and the Knicks are in the standings, and they end up being the 3 seed and having to face off against the 6-seeded Philadelphia 76ers or the Orlando Magic, depending on how that sets up. Or they could prioritize health. What do you think would be the best pathway forward for the Cavs? And I know you're a ball enthusiast by heart, so sometimes the answer is just hoop and see how things figure out. But what do you think, especially knowing that the Cavs were thinking about Boston last year, 2 years ago, were planning for a different runway as well, kind of trying to change the standings at the last game to figure out who their matchup was going to be. Didn't work out in their favor either way in both of the last 2 years. What is your thought process going forward?
Yeah, you said it. Play basketball if you're able to play basketball. That is my answer for a couple of reasons. Number one, this is still a very new nucleus around James Harden. I mean, there are 2 sons around which the Cavs orbit right now. One's Donovan Mitchell, one's James Harden. James Harden's still new. You want to get him as many reps with as many of these players as you possibly can. You want to get Kenny real rotation decision reps. Let him work through as many of the actual playoff guys that experiment with as many of those lineups as he possibly can. We've been talking about Chris, the subtext out there the other day that Kenny's trying to figure out if he can survive with Keon Ellis and Jalen Tyson type guys at the 4 instead of instead of Dean Wade or in relief of Dean Wade. That's valuable information that you need to collect over, and you don't have a lot of time to collect it, right? That's again another part of this new construction, because it used to, you used to have DeAndre Hunter as another big wing that you could use. Maybe if not at the 4, then as a guy who could give you some more versatility in those lineups, as a guy who takes a big position assignment on the defensive end of the floor, right? So I think for that reason, you just need the reps together, right? The other reason is, first, it's way too early. That's another reason. Like if you want to start messing with the standings with like 1 or 2 games left, okay, fine. I don't think there's as much of a strategic reason why that would be a problem. It might be a basketball gods, basketball karma reason for that one, if you believe in those sorts of things. But I would also just say that, like, if you're focused on what's the quote unquote right first round matchup for you, then what are we doing here? If you think you can get to the conference finals, get to the conference finals. It's a ridiculous concept to be considering at this point in the season. We'll see how it pans out toward the end. But I think, for the most part, you're going to have to play 2 really good teams no matter what. So does it really matter? I get that the playoffs are like matchup oriented, but it feels like you're focused on the wrong thing. You're focused way too much on the small picture, not enough on the big picture when you're doing those sorts of things. And hey, the way the Cavs were talking on Friday after that Pistons game, sounds like they're feeling pretty good. So why does it matter? Why does it matter who they play?
The confidence level of this group is kind of showing that they think they can go toe-to-toe with anybody in the Eastern Conference, as Jimmy was alluding to. And I think that strength, or that strength of confidence, strength of mind, is different than what the Cavs have had in recent years, simply because they were mentally preparing for an opponent way before they knew what the standings were going to shake out to be, especially Kenny Atkinson admitting that last year they were preparing for Boston and got stuck with the Indiana Pacers and got ran out the gym because they didn't have the lineup or the roster construction built to match up with the Indiana Pacers. The other portion of this, Jimmy, and I said this on a recent podcast, and I want to reiterate it for all our new friends listening to the podcast. I think the trade of DeAndre Hunter, although he was having the worst season of his career, he was not engaged defensively, especially when off the ball. There were many things going wrong with the situation with DeAndre Hunter in Cleveland. But as I mentioned previously, if the Cavs do end up having to face the Boston Celtics with both Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and they have to look at themselves in the mirror and say, we have Dean Wade, who we are confident that can guard one of the 2 at any given moment. But we are not confident in finding a second stopper, someone who can step up to do that. Sure, Keon Ellis, Jalen Tyson, both great options, but undersized, but not in the same physical realm of a guy like DeAndre Hunter. 6'8", long wingspan, buff. Jalen Tyson, strong, athletic. Keon Ellis, a pest, likes to move off the ball and can't keep up when it comes to the off-ball defensive end of the floor. These guys all have their strengths and their weaknesses, but the Cavs went and traded for DeAndre Hunter last year, again, with facing the Boston Celtics in mind. I think it would be interesting to see a series like that where they no longer have DeAndre Hunter. Obviously, also, DeAndre Hunter got injured almost as soon as he got to Sacramento. So whether or not you would have had him, that's up to the basketball gods, right? But we can never look back into the past and kind of restructure our thinking. We can only think about what was and what is. So I think it'll be interesting. And obviously, the Cavs will get that first test, potentially with Jayson Tatum returning on Sunday. And how that could change or illustrate the thinking of the Cavs will be interesting to me going forward. And I'm curious to hear your thinking about this smaller iteration of the Cavs and how they could defend teams like the Boston Celtics, like the Oklahoma City Thunder if they get there, like the Houston Rockets, who deploy a team that can go a lineup of 6'10" across the board if they wanted to, 6'8" and above if they wanted to, 6'6" and above if they wanted to. There's a lot of teams, especially out west, that have that ability.
Like Cade. I know Dean Wade's your Cade matchup, but here's the other thing about the reliance on Dean Wade in a DeAndre Hunter-less world. What if we have one of these stretches where Dean Wade's not shooting the ball well or not shooting the ball at all? Like, at what point does the scale tip. I can envision a scenario where in a heated playoff series against any of these contenders, really, Dean Wade just kind of fading, getting lost on offense, not really shooting the ball, and teams just stop guarding him. And that cramps the Cavs spacing, and that's an even bigger problem when you're trying to run a bunch of pick and roll with James Harden, right? So then who do you turn to? And the thing, I like Jalen Tyson's feistiness. I like Keon Ellis's feistiness. Jalen Tyson's strong. But I just keep remembering back to playoff series a couple of years ago when the Cavs would try to put Isaac Okoro on one of the Jays. And Isaac Okoro can get to the same spots that they can get to. He just can't reach his hand up as high as their jumper goes sometimes, right? Like, they're not even seeing the contest sometimes. So that's where it becomes an issue. And I'll go back to one of the last games. I don't know if it was before the break or maybe it was the last game I went to before the come. I asked Kenny, who's next after Dean Wade if you need to defend a big wing? And he threw Keon out there. He threw James Harden out there. The Cavs are just, this is a hole. There's a hole in their roster now with Dean Wade or not. Like, it's okay. You have Dean Wade, who comes in behind it. Like we're saying here, what if the opposing team has two big wings who are talented to put the ball in their hands? Then you don't really have good answers. You don't really have good answers. And that's a scary feeling. I mean, I would say this. I would also throw Evan Mobley's name into this mix. I think Evan Mobley in the past has been an option that the Cavs try on Jayson Tatum. We should also reiterate that I don't expect at any point this season for Jayson Tatum to look like peak Jayson Tatum. So maybe that kind of alleviates some of this pressure for the Cavs. That being said, I still think even if Jayson Tatum's not hitting you with like a tween dribble series that can put a defender on the ground, right? They can still throw the ball to him in the post. They can still say, "Oh, you're gonna put Keon Ellis on him? Well, we're gonna throw the ball in the post. We're gonna see what you do. You're either gonna double team him, and that's gonna create an open look for us and start our offense up, or Jayson Tatum has like a 6-inch, 7-inch advantage under them, not to mention the weight advantage there. So it's still an issue. And this is one of the defining questions, I think, for the Cavs going forward. There's a Evan Mobley, Jared Allen corollary to this too, because number one is how much playoff level competent defense can you get out of this wing rotation? And if the answer is below playoff level, then how much can you make up with that? How much of that can you make up by playing Jared Allen and Evan Mobley together as often as you can, which obviously cramps your offensive spacing? Or how much of that can be mitigated by one of them being on the floor at all times? These are big questions that we do not know the answer to. Another reason to play your guys as much as you can down the stretch here, because you have a lot of stuff to figure out.
We talked a lot about this stretch of games being important to the Cavs understanding who they are against Eastern Conference contenders, what they are capable of. And I feel like the injuries not only threw a wrench in that, but also simply the standings threw a wrench in that as well. And I'm not saying that these games no longer matter. I think they might matter more when it comes to, as Jimmy was saying, putting themselves in the best position mentally to figuring out where they can go, what lineups they're going to be constructing, what sets they're going to be running, what combinations that Kenny Atkinson can find to put together to feel most comfortable out there on the floor. And obviously not having Donovan Mitchell is going to be changing a lot of things. It's going to be different. But I think over the final 18 games of the season, we're not only going to see the chemistry and camaraderie grow of this group, but we're also going to see how cautious this Cavs organization is going to be when it comes to its star players, when it comes to players with long injury histories, right? We talked about rest games for Dean Wade. Well, an injury popped up, so we didn't necessarily get rest games. So I think it'll be interesting to continue to see how the Cavs orient themselves over the latter portion of the season, especially as opponents like the Boston Celtics are getting healthier, are getting back to themselves, and the New York Knicks are going to be trying to maintain their seeding, especially being the number 3 seed and potentially matching up with one of the iterations of the Philadelphia 76ers, the Orlando Magic, the Miami Heat, all potentially in that 6th seed when it comes to the end of the season. And that's what makes this portion of the season so much fun, Jimmy, is that there's still so much to learn. There's so many things that can still change at the drop of a hat. And a 5-game stretch in the NBA, we talk about it being an 82-game season, a 5-game stretch can change the outlook of the standings, especially in an Eastern Conference that we've classified since the beginning of the season as wide open.
I wanted to go back to what we were talking about, the Cavs playing against Tatum potentially on Sunday. Obviously, you want to stack as many wins as you can. You want to get as high of a seed as you can to a certain point. You want to get home court advantage for as many rounds as you can, I think, in the playoffs. I still think it matters. But I was saying, like, under that thinking, you'd be like, well, wouldn't it be better for the Cavs if Tatum played on Sunday and they were one of his first games back, because then the Celtics were discombobulated. You have a better chance of getting a win there. Maybe build some confidence against them, getting a head-to-head, or whatever, all that stuff. I'm just saying, like, the rest of this season is a fact-finding mission, and I want better facts when I'm trying to size up the Celtics. And I don't think that the quality of my facts are going to be very good when Jayson Tatum is playing in his first or second game coming off of Achilles surgery. That's, going to be one of the faster comebacks we've seen from that injury. I'd rather collect that data later on, not the way it works, but I'll be interested to see what he looks like at every step of this process.
I agree. And I think it'll be fun as we continue to see how Donovan Mitchell looks, potentially when he comes back, especially with a soft tissue injury, and the Cavs wanted to be cautious with him. And as I mentioned, the Cavs trying to use this 4-day stretch, obviously not having a lot of practice time last year heading into the playoffs, potentially using that for film, potentially using that for all-out practice. We are going to learn a lot, and I think that is the most interesting and most intriguing part of this coming week. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Celtics. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage of the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.